Sorry, man, I was arresting a fucking guy for being a goddamn cocksucker.
I love it.
Welcome back to the Civil Rights Lawyer channel, where not only do we look at videos showing interactions between citizens and their government officials, but we also discuss the applicable federal civil rights laws and also document the fight for accountability in the court system. So make sure that you subscribe if you care about educating yourself on your rights. Now, this video takes us to one of those situations where a regular law-abiding citizen ends up in jail after encountering a police officer who has some issues, to say the least. And he's not the only one to encounter this guy from the things that I have heard, but more about that later. On January 31st, 2022, Brian Beckett was traveling home from work, driving northbound on West Virginia Route 19 in Mount Hope, West Virginia. It was around 5:45 p.m. He ended up getting pulled over for speeding by the Mount Hope Police Department officer Aaron Shrewsbury. Instead of getting a speeding ticket or even a warning, Mr. Beckett ended up getting pulled out of his car that evening and arrested for obstructing an officer, disorderly conduct, speeding, and reckless driving. Mr. Beckett was driving home from an industrial work site in a nearby county. He's not a criminal, not out selling drugs or committing crimes, just trying to drive down the road and get home. He had a dash camera recording, and that appears to show that he was driving safely. It doesn't indicate his speed, but that's not what this video is about. Officer Shrewsbury would subsequently swear under oath in his criminal complaint affidavit seeking court authorization for Mr. Beckett's warrantless arrest that not only did he radar Mr. Beckett speeding, but that, quote, as I was catching up to the vehicle, I noticed that the vehicle was weaving through traffic recklessly. But that, quote, I was able to pull behind the vehicle and get it stopped, end quote. Now take a look at the dash cam footage from Mr. Beckett's car just prior to the traffic stop and see if that statement appears to you to be true. did you see Mr. Beckett's vehicle, quote, weaving through traffic recklessly? Surely this officer noticed the dash cams since Mr. Beckett was arrested and they searched and towed his vehicle. As it turns out, the vehicle was returned with missing memory cards out of the dash cams. However, the footage was later retrieved, fortunately. Also, fortunately, Mr. Beckett used his personal cell phone to record his interaction with Officer Shrewsbury during this stop. Despite the officer stopping the video, attempting to delete the video recording from Mr. Beckett's phone, the officer couldn't access it. Actually, during arrest processing, the officer was placing the phone in front of Mr. Beckett's face, trying to use the facial recognition software to unlock the phone, presumably so that he could delete the video, which he knew existed. But to no avail. So he was unable to delete this footage, and it shows this encounter, which led to Mr. Beckett's arrest, and the fact that Officer Shrewsbury stopped the recording. Take a look at this.
Go ahead and roll your window down for me.
It's all right.
Go ahead and roll your window down for
What do
me.
you need it down for?
Because I said roll the window down or you
Why
go
are
to
you,
jail.
why are you being like that?
Roll the window down now.
I'm not going to.
All right, go ahead and step up the door for me. Walk back here. Sorry, man. I was arresting my fucking guy for being a goddamn cocksucker.
I love it.
So, let's break that down here. So, Officer Shrewsbury immediately arrested Mr. Beckett for obstruction for not rolling his window down all the way. Never bothered to ask Mr. Beckett for his license, registration, proof of insurance, or even his name. He just demanded that the window be rolled down all the way, not providing a reason, just because he demanded it. Then immediately removed him from the car and arrested him. The officer never even identified himself, the reason he pulled him over, or explained any legitimate reason why he required the window to be rolled down. In the subsequent criminal complaint, no allegation was made or charged that it's even illegal in West Virginia to not roll one's window down completely during a traffic stop. He was merely just charged with obstruction. Now, under West Virginia's obstruction statute, the plain language of the statute establishes that a person is guilty of obstruction when he, quote, by threats, menaces, acts, or otherwise forcibly or illegally hinders or obstructs or attempts to hinder or obstruct a law enforcement officer, probation officer, parole officer acting in his or her official capacity. Now, the Fourth Circuit recently examined that statute, saying that to secure a conviction under that statute, the state must show, quote, forcible or illegal conduct that interferes with a police officer's discharge of official duties. Because conduct can obstruct an officer if it's either forcible or illegal, a person may be guilty of obstruction whether or not force is actually present. However, where force is not involved to effect an obstruction, the resulting obstruction itself is insufficient to establish the illegality required by the state obstruction statute. Confusing, yes. So, when force is not used, obstruction, this is usually referring to failure to identify oneself. So where force is not used, obstruction lies only where an illegal act is performed. An illegal act is performed. This is because, quote, lawful conduct is not sufficient to establish the statutory offense. Let me repeat that. Lawful conduct is not sufficient to establish the statutory offense of obstruction. So, West Virginia courts have held that when done in an orderly manner, merely questioning or remonstrating with a police officer while he or she is performing his or her official duty does not ordinarily constitute the offense of obstructing an officer. That was from a failure to identify case, Hupp versus State Trooper Seth Cook from 2019. Now, what did we see? At no point did Mr. Beckett refuse to participate in the traffic stop being conducted by Officer Shrewsbury. He rolled the window down partially. He was clearly visible through the non-tinted glass. His hands were visible and non-threatening. He hadn't refused to provide his license, registration, proof of insurance. He hadn't refused to identify himself or to do any act he was required to, under the law, to perform. Moreover, I'm aware of no state law in West Virginia, nor did Officer Shrewsbury identify one in the charging document requiring motorists who were subjected to traffic stops in West Virginia to roll their windows completely down as a matter of routine. It appears that this arrest occurred in the absence of probable cause and therefore in violation of the Fourth Amendment, but it didn't stop there. So Officer Shrewsbury also alleged that after pulling Mr. Beckett from his vehicle and placing him in handcuffs while walking Mr. Beckett to the police cruiser, that Mr. Beckett remarked, quote, "This was bullshit." Officer Shrewsbury wrote in his criminal complaint affidavit, "I then informed Mr. Beckett to stop cussing and placed him inside my vehicle." So, under West Virginia's disorderly conduct statute, no probable cause could exist for a warrantless arrest for disorderly conduct by virtue of saying, "This was bullshit." First of all, if that were possible, such would be a First Amendment violation. As the West Virginia Supreme Court has warned way back in 1988 that the freedom of individuals to verbally oppose or challenge police action without thereby risking arrest is one of the principal characteristics by which we distinguish a free nation from a police state. That's a good quote, 1988. Police should read it. First Amendment issues aside, merely using bad language in the presence of a supposedly sensitive police officer cannot violate West Virginia's disorderly conduct statute. Not that I expect law enforcement to actually learn the law, but there's actually a 2015 West Virginia Supreme Court case holding specifically that West Virginia's disorderly conduct statute, while potentially criminalizing some profane language under some circumstances in public in front of other people who complain, third parties, it doesn't criminalize profane language used by a citizen during their interaction with a police officer or with law enforcement. Now, if that's not enough, the U.S. Supreme Court has sent a clear message through the years through its rulings, such as Cone v. California, 1971, Lewis v. City of New Orleans, 1974, that free speech, however offensive or controversial to sensitive virgin-eared police officers, is afforded a high level of protection under our Constitution. Now, Officer Shrewsbury didn't even allege in his criminal complaint affidavit against Mr. Beckett that a third party had even overheard Mr. Beckett's use of the word bullshit or complained about it. Nevertheless, the local magistrate signed off on it anyways, approving this warrantless arrest as having probable cause under state law, which is a disgrace, given the fact that the state Supreme Court warned otherwise about 7 years earlier. Also a disgrace to our Constitution is the fact that these charges are still pending against Mr. Beckett. The individual police officers like this that you see in these videos, they never just do it alone. Behind the scenes, you have politicians, you have prosecutors. In fact, the politicians and the prosecutors behind the scenes of this particular police officer, Aaron Shrewsbury, really should explain to their public why this police officer is allowed to victimize citizens in the first place, given the fact that he had previously lost his certification to be a police officer in West Virginia while working at the Fayette County Sheriff's Office for, quote, dishonesty/willful falsification of information. No, unfortunately, I'm not making that up. That's right, this same police officer who filed false and incorrect charges against Mr. Beckett, as we've just explained, has somehow in the past managed to screw up his job as a police officer so badly that he lost his certification to be a police officer for lying as a police officer. Truly unbelievable, but also not unbelievable. And also not surprisingly, other complaints have surfaced about Officer Shrewsbury. So this one may sound familiar. August 15th, 2021, a few months before Mr. Beckett's incident, a 20-year-old kid from Ohio is driving through this same area. He ends up getting arrested by Officer Shrewsbury for the dangerous crime of misdemeanor possession of marijuana. And listen to this. The kid says, according to Shrewsbury's report, quote, "This is fucking bullshit," end quote. So that incident ended in Officer Shrewsbury punching that kid in the face and then placing him handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser with a blood-covered face and broken jaw, which required surgery to fix. The kid was finally able to get help from another police officer at the scene. He said, "Hey, I need help." When asked why this other police officer, why he needed help, the kid said, quote, "My tooth is in my lap." This is from the other officer's police report, by the way. The other officer then looked at the kid, saw a large amount of blood coming from his face and on his shirt. That officer then promptly took the kid to the hospital, which began a long period of medical treatment to fix the damage inflicted by Officer Shrewsbury. Now, more about that incident shortly in another video, because I will be handling that. But the question begs, why did the politicians and prosecutors turn this man loose on the public? You can see from this video the way in which he appears to hold regular citizens in contempt. We're not talking about meth billies that he's caught stealing stuff out of somebody's shed. This is just a guy driving down the road trying to get home from work. Or a kid driving into West Virginia to go whitewater rafting, whatever. He holds them in contempt. You can tell. Look how he's even describing this law-abiding, tax-paying citizen that he just arrested for no reason. Treats them like garbage to be discarded. If you have any information about Officer Aaron Shrewsbury, who, as far as I know, is still out there interacting with the public, please reach out. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for updates.